In the blood-soaked nightmare that was Tudor England, kings wore crowns like loaded guns. Heads rolled because a fat monarch woke up cranky, and fires burned because someone sneezed in the wrong chapel. Yet among all the butcheries of that paranoid carnival, one killing still reeks the loudest: the execution of Margaret Pole. Yeah, Henry, you really outdid yourself this time. Royal tantrums make for messy mornings. It was May 27, 1541, and a 70-year-old noblewoman was yanked toward the Tower of London's killing ground. Margaret wasn't some wild rebel waving a sword. She was an elderly lady whose only crime was carrying the wrong DNA. Her veins ran with Plantagenet blood, a lineage Henry VIII treated like a contagious disease. He wanted her erased, not because of deeds, but because of birth. Nice logic, Your Majesty. Kill grandma to feel safe. Genetic profiling, Tudor style, bring your axe. Margaret Plantagenet had royal connections deeper than Henry's own insecurities. Daughter of George, Duke of Clarence, niece to not one but two English kings, she carried a pedigree sharper than any blade in the Tower. Henry once restored her titles and even let her babysit his daughter, Princess Mary. But loyalty meant nothing to a king rotting in his own paranoia. Her very heartbeat felt like a threat. Nothing screams danger like a polite grandmother drinking tea. Beware the deadly knitting needles of noble blood. The real spark for Henry's bloodlust came from across the sea. Margaret's son, Reginald Pole, had turned into one of the king's loudest critics, smart, Catholic, and mouthy. From his comfy exile, he trashed Henry's split with Rome and called him a tyrant. Henry couldn't reach the son, so he settled for the mother. Classic coward move: kick the parent when the kid's out of reach. When you can't punch the boxer, slap his mom. By 1541, England was a snake pit of paranoia. Henry was obese, infected, and marinating in fear. He'd already chopped Thomas Cromwell, his own reform architect, and sliced wife number 5, Catherine Howard, like yesterday's roast. Nobody was safe, not even the tea-pouring countess locked quietly in her estate. Margaret's noble blood turned from honor to death warrant. Royal roulette. Everyone loses eventually. Henry's diet plan: one head per insecurity. Arrested in 1538 at age 65, Margaret was thrown into the damp rot of the Tower. For 3 years she endured interrogations, false charges, and a king's sneering hatred. No letters, no evidence. Just a royal hissy fit dressed up as law. Justice? Nah, this was paperwork with an axe. Evidence is optional when your crown fits too tight. Her lineage sealed her doom, her blood screamed threat, and Henry sharpened his paranoia on her bones. The stage was set for an execution that would redefine the word butchery. When power drinks fear, blood becomes the chaser. Margaret's arrest wasn't some sudden lightning strike of justice. It was a slow, grinding chokehold cooked up by a king whose brain was stewing in paranoia and infected ulcers. In 1538, at 65, the Countess of Salisbury was dragged into the Tower of London, that damp stone coffin where air itself smelled like doom. 3 years she sat there, a noble relic rotting behind walls that whispered death. Welcome to Henry's hospitality suite. Check in alive, check out headless. 5-star fear, 0 exit doors. Interrogations came like rats in the night. Accusations of letters she never wrote, plots she never dreamed, treason she never tasted. They pressed her for confessions, but Margaret stayed still. No trembling, no sobbing, no fake apologies to please the royal butcher. Grandma wasn't bending for a bloated king with a god complex. When Granny says no, even a crown can't make her yes. The so-called evidence, a carnival of nonsense. Whispers of correspondence with her son, phantom Catholic conspiracies, ghosts of treason conjured out of Henry's sweaty nightmares. Parliament, ever eager to lick the king's boots, passed a bill of attainder: no trial, no witnesses, no defense. Just a royal thumbs down and a death sentence. Law? That's adorable. Who needs a courtroom when you own the axe? Henry convinced himself, or pretended to, that Reginald Pole's letters from abroad were rallying foreign armies. Since the son was untouchable, the mother would bleed for both. It wasn't politics, it was petty vengeance, wrapped in crimson velvet. When you can't reach the wasp, stomp the hive. Can't kill the critic? Kill the cradle. While Margaret aged in the Tower's damp belly, England marinated in fear. Henry, now past 50, waddled through his palaces like a diseased bear, devouring food and suspects alike. He'd axed Cromwell, the architect of his own reforms, and tossed wife number 5 into the eternal singles club. Romance Tudor edition, swipe right for the scaffold. Henry's love language, decapitation. Margaret's Plantagenet bloodline, once a glittering badge of honor, was recast as a neon threat. Her survival alone looked like defiance, her heartbeat a royal insult. Every day of those 3 years was a countdown wrapped in silence. Imagine knitting while waiting for the axe to RSVP. Tick-tock, chop-a-clock. By spring of 1541, the king's paranoia reached a fever pitch. Catholic uprisings and foreign whispers convinced him that the old countess must die to prove his fist was still iron. Henry's order was simple: kill the woman, scare the kingdom, feed the legend of his terror, because nothing says stability like murdering a 70-year-old grandmother. National security brought to you by Grandma's blood. The tower waited cold and hungry, ready to chew another soul. Margaret prayed, Henry plotted, and the scaffold stood silent, thirsty for royal paranoia made flesh. Fear built the stage. Henry brought the blade. The morning of May 27, 1541, crawled in like a vulture. London woke under a sky the color of old bruises, and inside the tower, death polished its boots. Margaret Pole, nearly 70, was told her hour had arrived. She rose like a shadow made of iron, dignity clinging to her frail frame. No begging, no tears. Just a woman walking toward the king's slaughterhouse with the calm of someone who already knows mercy died years ago. Royal murder o'clock. Bring your own courage. When death knocks, Margaret answers without flinching. Her hair, silver, defiant, hid beneath a plain white kerchief. A simple black gown wrapped her bones like quiet armor. Guards flanked her, but she walked on her own, each step a silent insult to the tyrant who ordered her death. No groveling for the bloated king's forgiveness. Henry wanted fear. Margaret brought backbone. Granny's stride greater than king's ego. The execution ground was Tower Green, a private killing floor reserved for noble blood. No roaring crowds today, just 30 or 40 pale-faced courtiers, forced to watch every twitch and spatter. Intimacy makes horror sharper. Here, no screams could hide behind noise. VIP tickets to the apocalypse. Small audience, big nightmare. On the scaffold, the block waited like a hungry mouth. But Henry's paranoia had arranged a special gift. The tower's regular headsman was absent. In his place stood a substitute, an untrained butcher with shaky hands and zero skill. A king drunk on terror had forgotten the first rule of murder: hire a professional. Budget cuts kill clean beheadings. When HR fails, the blood gets creative. Margaret stepped forward, voice steady, proclaiming her innocence to the stiff-necked spectators. She commended her soul to God, knelt, and placed her neck on the block. She expected one swift stroke, a noble death if nothing else. But mercy is a language Henry never learned. Even gravity held its breath. Clean kill? Not on Henry's menu. The axe swung and missed. Steel crashed into her shoulder, exploding flesh and bone. Margaret screamed, a cry so raw it sliced the morning itself. Blood gushed like the king's unchecked paranoia. She didn't die. She staggered to her feet, a wounded lioness refusing the script. Grandma just broke the death choreography, missed the neck, hit the nightmare jackpot. The substitute executioner panicked, eyes wide, swinging again like a drunk lumberjack. Margaret tried to flee, stumbling across the scaffold, her black gown now a crimson flag. Each wild blow landed on back, arms, anywhere but the neck. It wasn't an execution anymore. It was a hunt. Henry ordered a beheading, got a horror show. Axe meets chaos, dignity keeps walking. Witnesses froze in disgust. Hardened men who'd watched burnings and quarterings gagged, some covering their faces, others turning away as Margaret was hacked like an animal in a slaughter pen. The tower itself seemed to flinch. Even the stones wanted out. When killers vomit, you know it's bad. The scaffold turned into a butcher's playground. The unskilled headsman, sweating terror, swung again and again, his blade whistling like a drunk mosquito. Margaret, bleeding and staggering, tried to dodge the steel meant to silence her. Each swing missed the clean kill and found her back, her arms, her shoulders. Flesh split, bone cracked, but the neck, the one target that mattered, mocked every strike. Henry wanted a quick headline. He got a live-action horror franchise. When amateurs swing, nightmares sing. Witnesses stood frozen, faces drained of color. These were courtiers who'd watched men burned, strangled, quartered, seasoned spectators of Tudor terror. Yet even they flinched, some turning away, others gagging as blood sprayed across the wood. Hardened officials covered their faces, stomachs twisting like rotten rope. If professional sadists can't watch, you know hell has clocked in. Even killers need sick bags. Margaret screamed to God, her cries echoing off the cold tower walls. She staggered forward, her gray hair wild, her black gown soaked into a living flag of crimson. The executioner chased her like a butcher after a runaway carcass, each blow a sloppy confession of incompetence. This wasn't punishment. It was a carnival of panic. Royal justice had become a drunk man with an axe. Justice spelled backwards is Henry. Some said 10 blows, others swore more, but numbers lost meaning in the chaos. The axe fell again and again, splintering her body while life clung stubbornly to her frame. Blood pooled at the scaffold's edge, soaking the boards until the wood itself seemed to bleed. The tower drank fear like wine and asked for refills. Floorboards got more iron than the king's spine. At last, Margaret collapsed, a ruin of wounds, but the butcher kept swinging. Stroke after stroke rained down until her head finally tore free from the wreck of her body. Silence crashed over the green like a tombstone. No cheers, no proclamations, only the dripping sound of tyranny's masterpiece. Henry didn't order an execution. He commissioned a nightmare. When silence screams, power grins. Her remains were dumped without ceremony, buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, among traitors and forgotten bones. No funeral, no monument, no royal token of regret. The greatest noblewoman of her age shoved into anonymity like yesterday's kitchen scraps. Henry erased her name but couldn't bleach the stain. Graveyard recycling, royal edition. News spread like wildfire. Pope Paul III condemned the act as the murder of Christendom's virtuous daughter. Charles V, her nephew and Holy Roman Emperor, fumed like a furnace. Across Catholic Europe, Margaret's butchery became proof that Henry wasn't a king, but a swollen tyrant in velvet robes. Europe took notes. History sharpened its quill. When popes and emperors gag, your PR is cooked. Inside England, the reaction slithered behind closed doors. Courtiers whispered in poisoned breaths, too terrified to speak aloud. They'd seen the Countess chased like an animal across the scaffold. Now they stared at their own reflections and wondered when the axe would taste their necks. Rank meant nothing. Service meant nothing. Margaret's blood proved loyalty was just a joke in Henry's twisted game. Serve the king, feed the blade, same job description. Promotion today, decapitation tomorrow. Henry himself, cold as winter iron. Reports said he barely blinked when told of the bloody fiasco. No apology, no shame, and just a satisfied grunt that the threat was gone. If the killing was messy, all the better. Terror works best when it smells of panic. The king's idea of quality control, more screaming, less cleanup. Henry's Yelp review, 5 stars for fear, 0 for mercy. Foreign ambassadors scribbled furious dispatches. Rome roared. Spain seethed. The Pope called it murder. Emperor Charles V called it family business gone rabid. Europe had seen plenty of executions, but this? A 70-year-old woman hacked apart like rotten meat. Henry didn't just kill Margaret, he torched England's reputation in every royal court from Madrid to Rome. Congratulations, Your Majesty, you just invented the international facepalm. Bad diplomacy, great horror marketing. Among the English nobles, the lesson was tattooed in blood. If the king could butcher Margaret Pole, daughter of Clarence, niece of Edward IV, governess to his own daughter, then no one was safe. Titles, worthless. Loyalty, a suicide note. Everyone in silk suddenly heard the soft music of the scaffold calling their names. Blue blood makes red puddles too. The legal system lay naked in the mud. Margaret had been condemned not by trial, but by a bill of attainder, a paper trick that let the king declare guilt without evidence. Law wasn't a shield anymore. It was Henry's chew toy. When the crown eats the law, justice becomes bones on the floor. Parliament, now serving royal paranoia a la carte. Her death wasn't just personal tragedy, it was a dynasty's funeral. The Plantagenet line, kings and queens who had ruled for centuries, was snuffed out with her final scream. Henry didn't just kill a woman, he erased a lineage, carving his Tudor brand into history with an axe. Family tree pruning, Tudor style, bring extra blood. When you fear rivals, delete the relatives. For women, the message dripped like acid. Margaret had raised no armies, plotted no coups. Her only crime was birthing a son who defied the king. Age gave no mercy, gender no shield. Henry proved even grandmothers make great targets when paranoia needs a scapegoat. Motherhood, now punishable by beheading. Every scream on Tower Green echoed a single truth. Henry's will was law, and law was whatever Henry's nightmares demanded. Margaret's blood signed the contract. Fear was king, justice was fertilizer. Crown first, conscience never. The tower tried to bury its shame. The scaffold was dismantled, its blood-soaked boards burned as if fire could erase memory. Guards scrubbed the stones, but the smell of terror clung like wet wool. Even hardened executioners avoided the spot, haunted by the sound of Margaret's screams ricocheting off the cold walls. You can wash the wood, but you can't bleach the nightmares. Blood leaves stains, fear leaves tenants. The substitute headsman vanished from London soon after, his name lost to history. Maybe he fled the king, maybe he fled his own reflection. Either way, the man carried ghosts heavier than any axe. When your resume says, Grandma Hacker, job interviews get awkward. New career path, running from memories. Margaret's son, Reginald Pole, rose to cardinal in distant lands, but the wound never closed. He spoke of his mother not as a victim, but as a martyr, a holy rebuke to a king who confused power with divinity. Every sermon he preached was another dagger aimed at Henry's rotting conscience. Too bad Henry's conscience was already dead on arrival. Preach louder, tyrants hate echoes. When Reginald finally returned to England under Queen Mary, he tried to restore the family's honor. Titles came back, estates were patched, but no ceremony could unsee the image of his mother chased across the scaffold like prey. Some ghosts don't sign peace treaties. You can't rebrand a massacre. Historians later called Margaret's death a turning point, a proof that unchecked monarchy devours law, mercy, and anyone with inconvenient DNA. Her murder watered the seeds of constitutional rebellion centuries later. But in her own time, it wasn't reform. It was raw terror, a warning carved in flesh that kings answered to no one. Henry ruled by nightmare, not footnote. Fear first, progress later. Her grave remained unmarked, mingled with traitors and forgotten bones. The greatest lady of her generation reduced to a nameless patch of earth. Yet Catholic whispers kept her memory alive, passing her story like contraband through the smoke of persecution. Henry tried to bury a woman, he planted a legend. Martyrs grow where tyrants dig. And what of Henry? History doesn't remember the banquet menus or the velvet robes. It remembers the screams, the splintered bones, the king's cold satisfaction as an old woman bled for his nightmares. The butcher of Tower Green thought he'd won, but his victory smells of rot. Power fades, blood stories don't. Crowns rust, ghosts gossip forever. Margaret Pole's death was more than the end of a woman. It was the death rattle of an older idea of kingship, one bound by custom, tempered by mercy. On that scaffold, Tudor England crowned fear itself. Henry fed the monster, and the monster wore his face. Tyranny eats kings last. Margaret Pole's death was not just a single act of cruelty. It was the loudest alarm bell of Henry's rotten reign. Her hacked body warned England that mercy had been buried under royal ego. If a 70-year-old grandmother with spotless service could be butchered, then every noble in the kingdom was one mood swing away from the block. Congratulations, Henry. You made paranoia the national anthem. Today's tea party, tomorrow's headbasket. Her execution revealed the toxic heart of Tudor law. Bills of attainder, those paper guillotines, turned Parliament into Henry's personal hit squad. No trial, no evidence, just a royal growl and a rubber stamp. Justice became a punchline, and the king's signature dripped more blood than the axe itself. When law sleeps with power, the baby is always a monster. Parliament, where fear gets notarized. Margaret's screams echoed far beyond Tower Green. Across Europe, the story of an elderly countess hacked to pieces spread like wildfire. The Pope thundered, the Emperor fumed, and Catholic courts everywhere spat Henry's name like a curse. He wanted dominance. He earned disgust. International relations, now with extra gore. When even Rome says, you've overcooked tyranny. But inside England, silence ruled. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, eyes darting to the door, tongues bitten bloody. To question Henry was to invite the same acts. They wore smiles in daylight and terror in their bones. Everyone learned the new etiquette. Bow deep, breathe shallow, plan your funeral. Good manners keep your head attached. Margaret's end also exposed a special cruelty toward women. She hadn't raised armies or plotted coups. Her so-called crime was motherhood, giving birth to a son who dared to criticize the king. Age offered no shield, gender no mercy. Henry couldn't kill the critic, so he slaughtered the mother. Cowardice dressed in velvet still smells like cowardice. When you fear the sun, you stab the womb. For centuries, the Plantagenet dynasty had ruled England. With Margaret's death, the final link snapped. Henry didn't just kill a woman, he deleted a bloodline, rewriting history in screaming ink. He thought extinction would secure his throne. Instead, it etched his name beside the word tyrant forever. Erase a lineage, engrave a legend, that's some backwards branding. Delete the past, advertise your crimes. Later generations would look back and see her execution as proof that unchecked monarchy poisons everything it touches. Margaret's blood helped water the seeds of constitutional limits, though she never lived to see the harvest. Her pain became tomorrow's rebellion. Ghosts vote with louder ballots. Henry wore his crown until death, but history strips velvet faster than disease. Today he's remembered not for songs or banquets, but for the screams he ordered. Margaret's voice still echoes, laughing at the king who thought terror could outlive truth. Turns out ghosts have better PR than kings. Power fades, legends leak forever.